thank you all for coming. If we could just kind of settle in. We have a wonderful speaker today for our advanced ed. I would like to introduce you to Courtney King. She is a citizen of the Peoria Indian Tribe of Oklahoma, but she lives and works right here in Kansas and the Wakarusa Valleys in present-day Lawrence. She grew up in Shawnee, Kansas, and she moved to Lawrence to attend Haskell, onward Haskell, and at the Haskell Indian Nations University in 2019. After graduating with a degree in environmental science, she is pursuing her master's degree while also serving as the Program and Land Stewardship Manager for the USDA Tribal College Equity Grant at Haskell, as well as the university's greenhouse manager, which I know many of you probably follow on social media. It's very exciting, all the work that they're doing. So everyone, warm welcome and round of applause for Courtney King.
Aya Chikewaya, Courtney King Wayne's Swaane, Nila Pewalia, Nehe Mihamia, Waya Tanuke, Ila Picasso One. Hello, everyone. My name is Courtney Eddie King. I'm Peoria in Miami. I'm descended from the Waya people, or the people of the River Eddy. Our homelands are up in the Great Lakes regions in Illinois, and I'm happy to be here with you all today to talk about Indigenous perspectives on land restoration and integrating traditional knowledges into ecological practices. As was mentioned, I am the Program and Land Stewardship Manager at Haskell Indian Nations University, where we've been doing a lot of really great work over the past few years to restore the lands at Haskell, which I will be getting into today. I'll also be talking a little bit about the history of Haskell and just the interconnectedness of Indigenous cultures with land care. This photo here is of swamp milkweed growing in the Haskell wetlands at Haskell Indian Nations University. Over the past few years, as I mentioned, we've been working to restore these lands, and the swamp milkweed populations are coming back and ever expanding in the wetlands as we continue our work on these lands. And one of my favorite native plant relatives, and of course, the monarchs really like them too. So I want to first root this conversation in the understanding that Indigenous cultures reflect the geographies of our homelands. Ecosystems are reflected through various ways through our cultural practices, including songs, land care, clothing, language, storytelling, artwork. And there are specific processes and protocols in regard to practicing these cultures, practicing land care, water care, and use, and caring for our more than human relatives we share these lands with. There are also specific rituals, ceremonies, and storytelling that occur during specific ecological and cosmological shifts. And for an example of this interconnectedness, especially in relation to the ecological and cosmological shifts, I have a picture here of a beautiful sandhill crane relative, as this month is the Chechakwakioswa, or the sandhill crane moon for my people, which lasts about from February 18th to March 18th, of course, today being the last day of the Chechakwakioswa. And I bring this up again to give this example of the interrelatedness of our cultures with the ecosystems of our homelands. And for many thousands of years, my people witnessed and observed sandhill cranes migrating from about mid-February to mid-April every year, and decided to emphasize their migration in one of our moons. We have 13 moons throughout the year, and the Chechakwakioswa is the first moon of the year. And while understanding and emphasizing the sandhill cranes, we also integrate the phases of the moon, or Kioswa, grandfather moon, to form a holistic picture of time. So this is how we tell time, is both through the cosmologies and different ecological changes throughout the year. And unfortunately, many of these cultural connections have been severed and disrupted in Indigenous and tribal nations across the nation due to removal, assimilation, and extermination of our peoples. And it's beautiful that we're still actively recognizing these knowledges and practicing these knowledges. And at Haskell Indian Nations University specifically, we have a really unique opportunity to basically be this central hub in the middle of the United States, the continental United States, for intertribal and ecological cultural learning. As many species native to Kansas are not only native to Kansas and our human-made borders, but expand throughout the Great Plains and in various tribal cultural areas throughout the United States. And dozens of these species still remain on Haskell lands, including various native plant species, but also animal species, muskrats, mink, bobcats, deer, raccoons, coyotes, etc. We have so many amazing species that tribal nations have had connections with for many thousands of years. And I'm hopeful that students who come to Haskell at this central hub of intertribal learning, they're able to relearn these species and take these knowledges back with them to their tribal communities and communities in which they live that need this healing work to occur across the United States. And so these provide opportunities for reconnecting with the land through culturally informed land care and research. And an example of a native plant relative that spans throughout many cultural regions in the United States right here is common milkweed, or Asclepias syriaca, or Leninja in my culture. And common milkweed is a very important plant relative to many tribal nations across the United States. Here's an example of just their cultural, of their range in the United States, up into Canada, to the northeast, the southeast, to Great Plains, over to even Oregon. And again, this just to put that in everyone's brains that, you know, if whoever was living in these areas, these tribal nations, have had connections to these species. And Haskell, again, is just this really amazing place to be able to, for people to reconnect with these practices. This semester alone, Haskell represents over 139 tribes here in the United States, and it can go upwards up to 150 some semesters. And many of these students are native, or their homelands are currently in Oklahoma. 39 tribes are in Oklahoma today. And most of these tribes were removed from the southeast and northeast regions of the United States. And so they have connections in Oklahoma to these species in Kansas, but they also have connections through their original homelands in which they were removed. And this work has been very important for me to recognize. And so I'm hoping I can just, you know, put this in Indigenous students' brains, and hope that they can take these healing practices wherever they go. Growing up, unfortunately, I had no connection to my tribe. That's due to many various reasons, of course, assimilation, removal, extermination, but also just some familial things. And it wasn't until I started attending Haskell Indian Nations University, looking around me and realizing that all of my fellow Indigenous peers knew their people, they knew their cultures, and they stood strong in who they were and representing their people. And I was definitely missing out on that and wondered why it was that my people, my family specifically, did not have deep connections to my Peoria people. And so in my undergraduate at Haskell, I worked really hard to do research about my family, about my tribe, about other tribes in the land, specifically here in Kansas. And through this work, I reconnected and fell in love with the land and our many more than human relations we share these lands with. And I also fell in love with my people and the Indigenous community here, especially the Haskell community. And I wanted to do whatever I could to heal the land at Haskell while also healing connections to our cultures through land care practices. And I honestly can't talk about the work at Haskell without giving some historical context as to why we're doing what we're doing and what these lands looked like prior to European colonization. And so when we're thinking about the Wakarusa River Valley specifically, they were historically mosaics of open marshlands, tall grass prairies, wet prairies, and riparian woodlands. And these areas are culturally significant to many tribal nations. These prairie forest ecotones had many various plant relatives living here, and so tribes would come here for hunting, harvesting, fishing, intertribal councils, ceremonies, etc. This is a very well-documented area of the world that has deep cultural significance to Indigenous peoples. And in the late 1800s, settlers would forcibly remove tribes from the region. The Kanza people were the last tribe to be removed in 1873. And this was due to the pressures of settlers on the Missouri-Kansas border. When they fought in the Civil War, they thought that further entitled them to land, specifically Indian land. And so they pressured the Indigenous peoples along the border, my people included. My people were once in Kansas as well for about 50 years. And it forced all of these Indigenous people to cede their lands to the United States government and be forcibly removed to Oklahoma. Again, the 39 tribes of Oklahoma, many of them were here originally too. And not all tribes were removed, of course. We have the Prairie Band, the Kickapoo, Sac and Fox Nation, and Ioways who are still here today up in northeastern Kansas, close to the Nebraska-Kansas border. But I have to contextualize these histories for everybody, just so that we're all on the same page throughout the rest of this presentation and beyond. And this photo here is, of course, of the Kanza people. These are 4 Kanza women here, and there's a little baby there in a cradle board. You can see the teepees in the back there and the woodlands surrounding them. And this was actually taken in Salina, Kansas, not the Wakarusa River Valley, but I think it gives a good example of how the Kanza peoples lived with these lands. Which leads us to Haskell. After the Kanza were forcibly removed in 1873, Haskell would come about in 1884. And this photo here is showing the Haskell Institute back in 1935, the main campus area being to the north here, and then all the agricultural fields being to the south. And Haskell originally had 1,011 acres total, stretching all the way to the Wakarusa River, which I'll get into a little bit later, but I just wanted to show you all just kind of what these lands looked like about 100 years ago. As I mentioned, Haskell Indian Nations University originally opened in 1884 as the United States Indian Industrial Training School. And in 1887, the name of Haskell Institute would be, or the name of the United States Indian Industrial Training School would be changed to Haskell Institute after Dudley C. Haskell, who was a Kansas state representative who advocated for Haskell to be located in Lawrence. This photo here is showing the historical arch that used to stand out outside of Haskell. That's no longer here, of course, but this road is actually Old Barker Avenue that used to extend all the way to the Wakarusa River to the south. And all of these buildings in the photo are no longer either. But this is what people and children would have seen when they first arrived to Haskell. They would see this arch and be marched to and from classes and other coursework. During the assimilation era, from approximately 1884 to 1933, children were stripped of their identities, and this was done through the cutting of hair, the forbidding of native languages, the destruction of traditional clothing that were usually burned in burn pits on arrival. And children were severely punished for often minor infractions or mistakes. And some of the punishments include floggings, which were banned in 1929. There was also a jailhouse located on campus as well, in which children were forced to sit in for hours at a time. And there was also this specific form of abuse called cross on knees, where they had children essentially kneel for hours at a time, which would damage their tendons and ligaments in their knees over several hours. And so I like to assume that children likely walked away, who experienced cross on knees, walked away with, long-lasting harm to their knees. It's been estimated that about 500 to 1,000 children died at Haskell Institute. Some were laid to rest in the Wakarusa River Valley, including in the cemetery with over 104 children are buried today. But there's also oral knowledges and documents indicating that there are unmarked burial sites within the floodplain as well, specifically within the area of the old Haskell farm, closer to the Wakarusa River. Children would try to escape from Haskell Institute and would run away to the Wakarusa wetlands to meet their families, partake in cultural practices in secret, speak their native languages. And deaths are also a wide range, including illnesses, drownings, gunshot wounds, electrocutions, etc. So they faced, some tremendous trauma during these times. And this photo here is what you'll tend to see when we're talking about the assimilation era at Haskell. This is called Haskell babies, circa 1890. And you can see what I'm talking about with their hair being cut short. The boys would get their hair buzzed. The girls would get their hair cut kind of like mine. And the girls were forced to wear dresses, boys wore button-ups, and a lot of the times when the children got older, they would be forced to wear military-esque clothing with military insignia, etc. And while we're talking about the assimilation of Indigenous children into the Western mainstream, Haskell lands were also experiencing assimilation into the Western mainstream during these times. This occurred through the destruction of the natural areas of the Wakarusa wetlands, including heavy tilling, fertilizer use, and compaction of soils, conversion of native ecosystems to non-native monocultures, including corn, beans, rapeseed, wheat, etc., levee and drainage system construction, infilling and tiling of wetlands and floodplains, road construction, and fire suppression. So the culmination of all of these various land practices have gravely damaged the Haskell lands in some areas. And this map specifically is showing a 1919 to 1924 crop rotation at Haskell. And over on the right side, that you can't see it obviously from where you are, but that's the legend showing exactly what year was what. And this map has become a very important part of my research, as at Haskell, we don't really have that much land history, that much knowledge surrounding the land history and historical uses. So there's this map and a couple of other maps that indicate land use history. And so this really just kind of takes a snapshot into time into what areas of the land were what at a specific time. Drainage systems were installed on the east and west sides of the main campus area to help with draining away excess water from the agricultural fields. That dark black line you're seeing cutting across, that's the levee that was constructed in the early 1900s. And then on the right or the left side of the screen, that is the main campus area, which is still true today. Most of Haskell lands are actually in the floodplain. So we aren't allowed to build in those areas where the floodplain. So we're kind of trapped in just a little section of upland in the Wakarusa River Valley there. And just to give an example of what this looked like when I'm talking about intensive agriculture and Western agricultural practices, this is a 1912 Avery, about a 1912 Avery steam tractor with students there on the till. And essentially, these beautiful lands, these prairies and open marshlands, wet prairies, were essentially completely destroyed and erased from these lands, marginalized to the edges of the fields. And today we're trying to do, again, what we can to bring these lands back to who they're meant to be and who they had been for many thousands of years. The end of the assimilation era would come about in 1933 when Dr. Henry Rowcloud of the Winnebago tribe of Nebraska became the first Native superintendent at Haskell. Instead of focusing on the assimilation of Indigenous children and Indigenous students into the Western mainstream, he saw it fit to reorient the mission of Haskell to uplift and celebrate the Indigenous cultures. In 1934, the agricultural emphasis at Haskell would come to a close, and the land would mostly be utilized for haying. In 1935, Haskell became a post-high school vocational technical institution. And in 1970 is when we see Haskell become Haskell Indian Junior College, offering 2-year degrees. And now we know Haskell to be Haskell Indian Nations University, which in 1994 that became the case, where we became an accredited 4-year university. And during this time, after Dr. Henry Rocloud becomes the first native superintendent, again, we see that the agricultural emphasis end in 1934. And so a lot of the land, like I mentioned, would be utilized for haying over time. And we have lost a lot of land at Haskell. As I mentioned earlier on, we had originally 1,011 acres total, which is being displayed there on the left side in that purple polygon. And on the right side, that is showing the current landholders of historical Haskell lands. In blue, that dark blue, that's going to be the city of Lawrence and USD 497. In that light blue, that's going to be Douglas County. And that yellow is the Wakarusa fire station. And then you have the University of Kansas in red, the Kansas Department of Wildlife and Parks in lime green. That little pink section down there is a private landowner. That land was actually sold before Dr. Henry Rocloud became the superintendent, which it has its own little kind of history, honestly. And then that big orange section is going to be Baker University wetlands. So, as I mentioned, 1,011 acres total. We lost 70% of our acreage. And today we only hold about 30% of our original lands at about 320 acres total in that purple section there. And of course, we have the South Lawrence Trafficway cutting across. So that section down there is kind of like hazy as far as like who owns what exactly. It's not really delineated well on public records, but I obviously assume that that is the easement for the road. And specifically regarding the South Lawrence Trafficway, Baker Wetlands got those 572.68 acres for $0 through a 30-year quit claim deed through Douglas County. And the only terms of that deed was that they utilized the land for educational purposes. So in 1968, that land was deeded over. And then in 1998, they basically finished the terms of the deed, and they're able to keep that land in perpetuity, and they can still hypothetically do whatever they want with that land. And that section of land, the 572.68 acres, gave rise to the South Lawrence Trafficway as Baker University leveraged historical Haskell land for mitigations. And so for over almost 30 years, a organization at Haskell called the Wetlands Preservation Organization partook in advocacy campaigns, litigations, marches, and other forms of advocacy throughout this time. And you can see there, that's on Mass Street during one of the marches. And that banner actually still exists today, which is really cool. It's hanging up in Sequoia Hall at Haskell Indian Nations University. Down on the bottom left, that is the group of some of the Wetlands Preservation Organization people on the old boardwalk system. And that section of land where that boardwalk was is under the highway right now, so no longer exists. And of course, on the right here is one of the newspaper articles that came out during the South Lawrence Trafficway days, kind of showing exactly where they were relocating the roads and all of that. So this history, it goes much deeper, obviously, than what I'm able to share today. But I just wanted to bring attention to and give context of the damages that have been done, not only to the land at Haskell, but to the community and the injustices that have been enforced on our community at Haskell. This is showing the South Lawrence Trafficway on the western side. For those of you who are not really familiar with Haskell lands, And for those of you who are familiar with this area, you can just kind of tune me out. But this northern section here is the Haskell wetlands. This little section of land here, that is Old 31st Street. So that was brought to grade during the South Lawrence Trafficway days, and they took all of that out, took all the extra soil and used it for fill for the South Lawrence Trafficway. So Old 31st Street was rerouted to the south of Haskell's University. And so that's a 4-lane road now. And then obviously the South Lawrence Trafficway, a 4-lane highway to the south of 31st Street. And then Baker Wetlands on the other side. And that section you're seeing right here, that is all historical Haskell lands there. And the mitigation lands are further west that Baker got through the mitigations through the Federal Highway Administration during the SLT days. Baker, so on top of the 572.68 acres that they got for free of Haskell lands, they also received 390 extra acres on the east and west sides of historical Haskell lands. And the effects of the South Lawrence Trafficway can still be felt today. And unfortunately, when the South Lawrence Trafficway was built, it devastated many people in the community, and many people in the Wetlands Preservation Organization that was the leading organization in litigations went dormant. And there was another club at Haskell called the Haskell Tribal Eco Ambassadors that took on restoration initiatives from about 2016 to 2018 in the Haskell wetlands. This included removing old barbed wire. There were old barbed wire fences out there from Haskell Institute days when the lands were utilized for agricultural purposes. They also partook in fixing up the old 31st Street roadbed and planting various native plant species, etc. And then COVID-19 occurs and halts all these initiatives, not only due to the pandemic, but because Haskell saw major renovations during this time, during one of the most historical 50-year renovation overhauls at Haskell since basically the 60s. And so with the culmination of all of these things, when I arrived to Haskell, there was not, of course, not anything really going on, especially during the COVID times. We were all online, and so we weren't really able to go out on the land and do anything until about 2022 is when I started working at the Haskell Greenhouse through the USDA Tribal College Equity Grant. And I wanted to do something more than just growing plants or tobacco plants in the greenhouse, which is beautiful. I love growing the tobacco plants at the greenhouse inside, but I wanted to do more for the land. And I just didn't really know how to do that at that time because there was not really any initiatives going on. And even though COVID-19 and the South Lawrence Trafficway definitely slowed things down a little bit, we're still here and we're still trying to do what we can to heal these lands from the destruction of these practices, these colonial practices. And so, as I mentioned, in 2022, I started working at the greenhouse. And then I wanted to see something more of the greenhouse. And so I started working on reorienting the greenhouse to partake in healing these sacred ecosystems at Haskell. Our restoration initiatives began in May of 2023. And throughout our first season, we actually worked closely with the KU Field Station and Native Lands Restoration Collaborative to kind of act as a catalyst to getting these initiatives started out on the land. And since May of 2023, we removed thousands of invasive species individuals. There are all sorts of invasive species on Haskell lands. Bush honeysuckle is a big one we deal with, Japanese honeysuckle, teasel, Ceresia lesbideza, Johnson grass, many, many more. But we've removed a bunch of them and have opened up these areas for native seed spreading, which we've spread thousands of native seeds. And we've planted hundreds of native plant plugs, these seeds and plugs. So for the seeds, we will collect them right here in local ecosystems in Douglas County, even on Haskell lands. We also get donated seeds by community members and organizations. Of course, Native Lands Restoration Collaborative being one of the big community organizations we work with to get native seeds back in these ecosystems. And then our native plants, we grow them ourselves from our seeds we collect. We also get donated plants from community members. And then we also get donated plants from various organizations here in Douglas County and beyond, including Native Lands Restoration Collaborative. So we've done a lot of work lately, and it's been a beautiful experience, to say the least. And through this, as I mentioned earlier on, we teach Haskell students how to care for these lands utilizing traditional and contemporary land stewardship practices. And we don't, while the emphasis is on Haskell students, we also try to teach community members who are interested in learning these various methods as well. And through this work, it's, as you can see kind of by my presentation today, I try to convey these truths that are often omitted in the dominant narratives here in Douglas County and beyond. Much of the history surrounding this, the deep history, cultures, and ecologies of the Wakarusa River Valley are often left untold in how we understand these lands and understand the people who interact with these lands and the injustices that have occurred. And so I just try to keep bringing light to those histories, cultures, and ecologies, and hoping that other people will share these histories, cultures, and ecologies more broadly. And one thing of Indigenous land care is that community is central to caring for the land. And none of this work has been done solely by us or in a vacuum, a Haskell vacuum per se. We try to open up these doors for anybody and everybody willing to learn these various practices. And over the past few years, we've hosted over 60 workdays, events, tours with local, regional, and national organizations and institutions. This photo here is actually when we got our brand new interpretive signage installed out in the Haskell wetlands. We got 4 new interpretive signs installed out there telling about the histories, cultures, and ecologies of the land, when of course we can't be out there to do that. And the Lawrence Times came and reported on it, and we invited the greater Lawrence community to come out and see the signs for themselves. So that just being one of the examples of the events we've had over the years. I've given over 30 presentations and guest lectures over this work, and have collaborated with many various local organizations and people, and of course have collaborated with various departments, student, staff, and faculty at Haskell. And I would say that our work is ever growing in the community in general, but especially at Haskell. Every semester I get more and more people coming to me and coming to the Haskell greenhouse to get to know these land stewardship practices and get to know these species. And hopefully, again, so they can take them back wherever they go. And now, to get to the actual ecosystems themselves at Haskell, we have about over 165 acres of woodlands, wetlands, and prairies that remain on our land today. And the 165 acres also includes areas that are grassy areas that I kind of consider, they should be prairie. So I throw them in there as well. But we have about 52 acres of open marshlands and wet prairies. Of course, the Haskell wetlands proper being down in the foreground there. 54 acres of riparian woodlands and swamps, and 56 acres of tallgrass prairies and wet prairies. And this photo is just showing a little bit of a few of those ecosystems. As I mentioned, the Haskell wetlands there in the foreground. That's the Haskell medicine wheel back behind the wetlands. And then the East Prairie is just north of the medicine wheel there. And many of our prairies are dealing with severe invasive and woody species encroachment. And so that's been our focus these last few years, is to try and do what we can to open those canopies and restore the prairie that is supposed to be in those areas. Over 215 plant species have been documented via iNaturalist. So we have an iNaturalist project that we host at Haskell for people to go out and take part in identifying species on the land. And then we've also done some formal land surveys at Haskell to determine what species are living in these areas. And then over 150 documented vertebrates. I mentioned some of the the animals earlier, but a lot of these vertebrates are going to be the migratory birds, of course. So great blue herons, snowy egrets, wood ducks, northern shovelers, red-winged blackbirds, so many amazing migratory birds visit our wetlands every single year. Oh, and I should mention one other thing too. So our prairies at Haskell, specifically the east and west prairies, have been mowed the same time every single year. So they typically used to mow the prairies about June or July every single year. And so that's come with a myriad of issues in the prairies specifically, including woody and invasive species encroachment, but also a buildup of biomass in these ecosystems. And so about a year ago, I finally got facilities to stop mowing a couple of the prairies at Haskell Indian Nations University. So we're able to just see who's living in these spaces, because originally they were just cutting their heads off and kind of leaving them for dead. And so now that we've been able to have these areas unmowed, we've been coming in and trying to identify every species that we see. And so this wet East Prairie actually specifically took me running out and waving my hands to get them to stop mowing. And now I think we're all kind of getting on the same page, which is good. This is showing a little bit of I hate doing this. I hate divvying up ecosystems like this, but I think it kind of gives a good idea spatially. So these are the ecosystems of Haskell, the Haskell wetlands in the yellow, the West Prairie, which is actually one of our remnant prairies in the blue on the left side of the map there. The green is, of course, the woodlands. We have prairies up to the northeast in that red central prairie. So yeah, most of these areas are going to be prairie. And yeah, I've been trying really hard to essentially map these areas at Haskell too, because nobody had done that historically either. So I've been using my knowledge of the land and my GIS knowledge to essentially map these areas and to be able to tell these stories to facilities and the Haskell administration as well, as some people in administration are not as connected to the land and don't really get to go actually like out on the land. And so hopefully by me kind of giving them these maps, they're able to kind of spatially recognize these ecosystems and understand the story and work we're trying to do. Okay, there we go. Sorry. And so this photo here is of the photo I took of the woodlands back in 2023. This is when we first started our restoration initiatives at Haskell. I literally just went out one day because, I mean, you can see in this photo how bad the bush honeysuckle is here. And I used to walk by this every single day. And one day I just started cutting them down. And it turned to a movement because I started taking the pictures I was taking, I started putting them on our greenhouse social media and just trying to get the word out that we were doing these things. And since we've started right here, this whole trail system has been cleared all the way to the south and opened up on both sides. And we've been working really hard to restore the native understory in these areas. Throughout my years, my student time at Haskell, I partook in many hours of bundling native plant medicines and providing them to the Indigenous community at no cost. A lot of times Indigenous peoples have to go and buy our sacred herbs and medicines on commercially, and I just felt we could kind of serve as this middleman essentially to mitigate people having to go and buy these medicines. We could just give it to them for free. Haskell has so many cedars, and we also have white sage growing, and we grow tobacco. So giving it to the Indigenous community at no cost is something we still do today as well. We've had some I guess celebrities come to Haskell, the Haskell wetlands specifically. This is Alexis Nicole. She's also known as the Black Forager on TikTok specifically. She came out with out and removing cattail out there. And then this was back in 2023. Actually, the Kansas City NPR, they came out and did a piece over here. She's a Wichita woman who partakes in grass house thatching. Her grandfather taught her, and so we used cattails for this because we didn't really have much access to our native to the native grasses, and so we used cattails as a substitute, and we're working on thatching one of the sweat lodge structures out in the wetlands, practicing these practices. This is in that East Prairie I was talking about earlier. Behind me was basically a wall of bush honeysuckle and black locust specifically. And I mean, that's completely been opened up at this point. This was the first day we had started working out there. And Haskell students, various Haskell students will come out through their coursework or also just out on their own accord to help take part in these initiatives. And I try to do what I can, like I said, to teach the community how to go about removal of invasive species, what ecologically sufficient species should be going back to these areas, and just getting our hands dirty and in the soils, which is really important for community healing in general. This is that same area where we cleared a bunch of black locusts. This is Pequas Hernandez, one of the student researchers I work with. I work with 10 student researchers at Haskell currently, and they all represent 10 different tribes, which is amazing. And yeah, we were specifically cutting the black locusts here, which took a lot of time and effort. Pequas and Sky, they were planting some tobacco in our greenhouse. And then this is in one of our other prairies. This is Alexis Whitehorn Corey's here, and Carly. Carly is no longer with us, but we were out working, removing woody and invasive species from this area. And this is actually one of the remnant areas of this prairie too. And so we've just been working really hard to remove the invasive species and reintroduce the native species that belong on these lands. We partake in various land surveys. This is the one we did specifically with Native Lands Restoration Collaborative out in the West Prairie at Haskell. So the students take part in these initiatives to learn land survey methods and other methods of land care and science work. And then one of the most notable events we've had so far is that of the one with the Bulrush Ladies of the Meskwaki Settlement. They came down from Tama, Iowa, to teach us how to weave cattail mats, which is what they use for their wickiups up north, or my people know them as wigwams. And so, yeah, we went out and collected a bunch of giant cattails. Those were about 10 feet tall there, and worked to weave them into mats. And this was a beautiful experience. It brought together so many people within the Haskell community to take part in these efforts of cultural revitalization and reclamation. This is me. I try to drag the students out to these ecosystems locally whenever I can to show them the native plants that live around here, especially the native plants that we don't get to see at Haskell, because obviously the lands have been so disrupted from colonization that a lot of the more sensitive species can't be found on Haskell lands at this time. And so I'll take them out to the Wakarusa River where I know of higher quality ecosystems, especially woodland ecosystems. This was out at Mutt Run Dog Park, near the dog park. There are beautiful populations of white fawn lily and trout lilies and Dutchman's breeches that I love showing them. Or they're, some of our ephemerals that I love showing them early on in the year. This is us working in the wetlands. Teasel, as I mentioned, is a really big species we deal with at Haskell. We deal with both cutleaf teasel and common teasel. This is the cutleaf teasel we're dealing with here. And the old roadbed I was talking about, the old 31st Street roadbed, used to has them towering over a lot of these areas, and they've really spread and have displaced so many native species that deserve to be in these spaces. And so instead of using herbicide, we tend to just dig them up or we just lop their heads off. They're a biennial species, so hypothetically they'll be gone within a couple of years. And so we just try to get them not go to seed and just chop them out of the ground so that we don't have to use herbicide in these wetlands. This was specifically a time when the Lawrence Times came out and did a piece over the work we were doing out in the wetlands. I think there were about maybe 30 people or so who came to this day. It was a really beautiful experience. And then, of course, the Courtney Masterson here. Courtney comes out frequently throughout the year with us. This was specifically this past fall. We were out in the West Prairie collecting some native seeds, and that brought quite a few people out as well. And all of these seeds, we kind of transfer them around so everybody can get some different genetics. And then we also will throw them back out on the land in areas at Haskell that don't have a specific population of a specific species, for example. And then eventually, or they're grown into the little baby plants to be planted out on the land. And so through these processes, students get to learn Indigenous traditional ecological knowledges, especially that are culturally relevant to them. So hopefully, just by learning some of these basics of the plants, the animals, the soils, the waters, they can kind of tap into what their people know and utilize their practices to inform what we're doing out on the land as well. They learn how to identify native plant species to Kansas, of course, and their cultural uses. How to care for the land utilizing traditional and contemporary land stewardship practices. And we really like intermingling traditional ways with contemporary ways, of course. When I think of contemporary, I'm thinking of like the electric weed whackers and the electric little, what are they called? The chainsaws and things of that nature. And then of course, they get to learn, and they always hear me blab about the histories, cultures, and ecologies of the Wakarusa River Valley. So I always try to drag along our students whenever I have tours at Haskell or when people come and visit at Haskell that know a lot of things, try to get them to join us to learn these histories, cultures, and ecologies, again, so that they can be informed and share these knowledges with people as well. They learn how to use and maintain various tools, equipment, and light machinery. We have, regular like loppers and things of that nature. We have like electric tools, and we also have gators and tractors and things like that they can learn to utilize. And then through all of these processes, they gain professional leadership and academic skills for future careers. So my boss, Nana Allison Brewer, and we really try to instill these skill sets in them so that they can take these knowledges wherever. But then we've heard recently that a lot of tribal nations are looking for people who can learn on the fly. And so if we kind of show them how to learn on the fly, they can hopefully go and work for their tribal nations that need someone to wear multiple hats, per se. And as I mentioned, we have so many amazing species that live on Haskell lands, and though the biodiversity is lacking in some areas, we try to do what we can to revitalize those areas. And so this photo on the left side, that is, of course, Monarda fistuliosa, or purple flower, or bee balm, or wild bergamot. And they mostly live at the Haskell Cultural Center and Museum right now. We're still trying to get their populations started out on the land. It's actually been a little bit difficult. But we do give access at the Haskell Cultural Center and Museum Garden, which is another space we do take care of. We take care of the greater ecosystems at Haskell, and then also work to restore various native plant gardens around campus as well. The Haskell Cultural Center and Museum has been one since 2005. And so the last couple of years, we've been working to revitalize that little ecosystem for foods, medicines, dyes, and fibers that people may harvest and utilize. Purple flower is a fantastic tea. For those of you who have never had wild bergamot tea, you're really missing out. It is so good. I like it hot. I like it with honey, and it makes me feel really good when I'm sick. I will say that. chokecherry or Prunus virginiana. We have a little chokecherry thicket actually growing at Haskell. We did not plant them. They've kind of just shown up on their own. So we went out this year and harvested a bunch of chokecherries and gave some to the Haskell community. People make great jams and jellies with them. And you're not really supposed to eat them by themselves that much, but I will just pop a couple in my mouth and eat them. They're really great. And sunchokes are another species we have been working with pretty frequently these last couple of years. There's a pretty good sunchoke population actually at the Haskell Cultural Center and Museum. They've kind of taken over a little bit, so we're working on reducing their populations a little bit up there. So we've been harvesting their tuber roots to eat in soup specifically. And so this is Pequas when we were out harvesting those beautiful choke cherries. We got quite a few from just the little thicket we have at Haskell. And so we're hoping we didn't really realize that they were out there until last summer when we just saw all of them dancing around in the wind with all their big cherries on them. And so now we're hopefully going to be taking a little bit better care of that thicket. And then, as I mentioned, we use sunchokes for soup. So this past November, we worked with the Lawrence Public Library to host a soup making workshop with the sunchoke. So it was a 2-day event. People came out and harvested that Saturday, and then on Sunday we made a soup for the community. And sunchokes are very delicious. And they kind of I eat them. So the way we do it is we boil the roots like this, and kind of like to make them a potato texture, and then we puree them. So they kind of are almost like grits when you puree them, which I think are really good, and they're really earthy, sweet kind of flavor. They're so good. They don't really taste like potatoes. I would say they taste like sunchokes. And then just a few more native plants that grow on Haskell lands here. American lotus or Nelumbo lutea. Those are growing in our wetlands currently, and the population that started out there a couple years ago has been ever expanding. A very great native plant relative. Usually, many tribal nations, you don't eat their seeds. They'll boil their seeds and eat them in soups. Compass plant is one of my favorite plant relatives. Such an important medicine for Indigenous peoples. And so the sap, when they start oozing their sap, you can actually chew it like chewing gum and to sweeten your breath. And you can also use their sap to fix skin ailments. Like if you have a little cut or scrape or something, you can kind of take some of their resin and put it on a cut or scrape to help stop bleeding, etc., and help with healing. And then we have buttonbush, which is also a highly medicinal plant utilized by various tribal nations. They're used to reduce fevers. You can also chew their bark to help with toothaches, and you can use their leaves and their roots for a wash and for eye wash, etc. So there are various uses of buttonbush as well, and we have pretty decent populations out in the wetlands right now, but we need more of them, so we're working on getting more of them out there as well. And so when we're looking to the future of these lands at Haskell, we're going to be continuing what we've started. I've worked really hard to make it continuous. At Haskell and all academic institutions, there are many amazing students who come and do great work on our campus. And I don't want to say unfortunately, because it's great that they graduate and they move on. It's unfortunate though that they take those knowledges with them and then, there's no continuity with it. And so in starting this work, I really have had to kind of fight. Originally, at the beginning, I had to fight for my position, for my soft money funded position and the work we've started at Haskell, and showing that we want to continue to do this, and this needs to be integrated not only in the work that we do at the Haskell Greenhouse, but integrated into academic curriculum, because this is a pressing need in tribal communities right now, is land restoration, land work. Let's see, teaching and mentoring students on contemporary and traditional land stewardship practices. So like I said, I try to drag out the students whenever I can to take part in various initiatives at Haskell, but then also here in the local community, I try to send them all the invitations to go and do things with with various groups here in Lawrence and beyond. And as I mentioned, we're actively working to get this more solidified in the academic curriculum at Haskell, especially in the research at Haskell as well. The Tribal College Equity Grant is amazing and has so many possibilities in terms of actually solidifying these teachings into the curriculum. And so hopefully over the next couple of years, we can kind of see that transition occur to make this more sustainable and long-term. One thing I do want to take a moment to talk about is cultural and prescribed fires. I get a lot of questions from people in the community about, okay, so you're doing all the great work as far as removing and reestablishing these ecosystems, but what about fire? And fire has been a thorn in my side a little bit. So originally when I brought up the idea of fire, it was struck down by the university, an automatic no. And then recently, when Mackie Moore became the interim president at Haskell, I decided to take another stab at it and advocate for fire. He sent it up the chain, and some really great news is this past January, the BIA did approve my burn plan for the university. And so, yeah, so it's been a few years in the making. So it's been a really, really big deal, and it's finally starting to move. And so in the coming weeks, I'll have some meetings with the administration at Haskell to get fire. We're hoping it'll be reintroduced on Haskell lands by this fall. So, and it's been about 16 years plus fire cessation in these ecosystems. So these first 6 years, we're going to kind of do pilot burns to see how the land responds and then kind of shift where we need to. But it's undoubtedly true that the land will probably have to readapt to the presence of fire. And then, of course, continued advocacy for the Wakarusa River Valley at large. Of course, my work is focused really at Haskell, but the Wakarusa River Valley is a very important ecosystem to me, and I deeply care for the Wakarusa River Valley and feel, unfortunately, that a lot of our government officials and other people higher up do not seem to see the deep histories, cultures, and ecologies of these lands, and seeing it as a space to be protected for future generations. And so I'm going to keep being that annoying squeaky wheel, I guess, to say. And I'm going to say this photo really quick. This photo is showing our West Prairie, our remnant prairie. And this specific prairie has not seen fire for 16 years. And this was one of the prairies that was being mowed the same time every year. So this past 2025 was the first year it hadn't been mowed for probably decades. And so we're still working on getting the plant lists and working on obviously restoring these lands. You can see the severe woody and invasive species encroachment in this north section, and then the south section is really bad as well. But we did get kind of lucky with this middle section, I will say. And this little plot you're seeing in the corner, that is Dory Summers' plot. She is a master's student in the Ecology and Evolutionary Biology program, and she's specifically studying big blue stem. And so she has a little common garden plot studying the different local ecotypes of big blue stem. And if you would like to get involved in these efforts, I know some of you are probably familiar with Haskell Greenhouse at this point. I guess I'm kind of putting a face to the name. I am the manager of the Haskell Greenhouse, and we try to do what we can to bring the community out in various ways, not even just for labor per se, but even harvesting events, as I mentioned, the Lawrence Public Library harvesting events, seed harvesting events, and tours and other events of that nature. So yeah, we have Facebook, Instagram, and we have a website that I've been working on building. And the website is really, it has it's kind of just like the one-stop shop to just kind of get to know what we do. And then we also have the second annual Haskell Wetlands Day coming up on April 10th from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. in Tecumseh Hall. During this time, we'll be showing a new documentary, actually, that was produced by the Rising Voices Changing Coasts research fellow, Brendan McInerney. He works closely with Dr. Dan Wildcat and got some old footage from the 90s during the South Lawrence Trafficway, got them digitized, and is working all of it to basically tell a holistic story of where we are today and continued advocacy of the Wakarusa River Valley. And then at 2:30, from 2:30 to 4, we'll be leading a little bit of a tour out on the land for those of you who want to get familiar with the lands at Haskell. But we have many amazing participating organizations that day, and there's actually not everybody's on that list. Some people didn't want their logos on there, so but it should be a really fun-filled day to be in community with one another and to get to know the land at Haskell Indian Nations University and the Indigenous community as well. I feel like there's still that veil at Haskell where people don't really know if they're allowed to go to Haskell or like interact with the community there. And I understand that, but whenever you see public events like this, it's safe to say that you are allowed and that we probably want you to be there. So I do hope we can see a couple of you there throughout the day. And those are my references, but that is all I got for you all. So thank you so much.
I have a quick question. In this process, that's more recent of like, for example, that remnant area that is no longer being mowed, has there been any species that have surprised you that have made a return or is new as far as you're concerned, that you got to witness or someone witnessed?
Yeah, so the reason we were even able to determine that the West Prairie is a remnant prairie is because of the land survey we did specifically with Native Lands Restoration Collaborative. When we went out there, I would say we were surprised by what species we saw. There is slender ladies trusses, or one of our native orchids, for those of you who are not familiar. Their presence was very surprising. We saw various, we saw Desmodium sessifolium or sessile leaf tick clover, which is also a remnant species, and their population is pretty big in the prairie actually. So yeah, we've definitely seen some species that are surprising to see. And with a burn, I can't even imagine who would come back. And so that's one thing I'm really excited about.
I was wondering if there's a resource for looking into invasive species in the area and getting help identifying them and how to manage them, say like online or through a book or anything.
That's a good question. So I've seen things here and there, like some organizations will post about like Bradford pears and like will post about specific like bush honeysuckle initiatives. But I mean, Courtney Masterson might be able to specifically speak to this, but personally, I haven't really seen like a comprehensive list. There is a list on the Kansas Department of Agriculture's website. I'm talking about some of the invasive species listed currently in Kansas. But then the thing about Kansas is that they don't list all invasive species that should be considered noxious species. And I'm thinking specifically of bush honeysuckle is not listed on the noxious list of Kansas. And so I honestly, one place I kind of think right off the top of my head is the Oklahoma State University. They have a really great Facebook page and they post on invasive species quite a lot and how to identify them. They put up little pictures of them and give people information that way. But yeah, I'm sorry, I don't really have like a an idea of like a comprehensive kind of list or detailed document.
Is there any talk of restoring the medicine wheel and planting native plants, inside?
Yes, that is actually one of our goals is to work there. The reason we haven't really been working there quite yet is one, they're still mowing. So we still have a few prairies that need to stop mowing. And I actually sent a map requesting that a couple weeks ago. So I actually need to follow up on that. And the other thing is the medicine wheel is obviously a very sacred and cultural site. And so I don't feel good going in there without Dan Wildcat, for example, and talking to Dan Wildcat. And so the medicine wheel is on the burn list. We have plans to burn that. And so hopefully through those conversations, we can talk more about in-depth restoration of that area. When the medicine wheel was first established in 1992, the original plans did include having the unmowed sections of the medicine wheel as native little native prairies. And they were for a little bit, and then obviously over the years they've lost their biodiversity. And so actually a portion of the medicine wheel prairie is remnant. I've found a couple of remnant species back there. So hopefully, yeah, doing land surveys, burning, and then of course reintroducing native species back to that area, of course, yeah.
In this photograph of the West Prairie, I seem to recognize that as being maybe the south end of the cross-country course. And that brings people out into that area, and hopefully brings them to appreciate what they're seeing out there. What are the challenges with that? Does that get in the way of some of these restoration efforts, or is it being integrated into the restoration?
Yeah, so the cross-country trail at Haskell is a blessing and a curse. It brings obviously some challenges in terms of being able to figure out like mowing, for example. So we have been able to figure it out in the West Prairie specifically, but the NAIA, I forget exactly what the acronym is, but it's essentially the athletic conference we're in at Haskell. They have a specific policy saying that any grassy areas need to have a 10-foot buffer along the cross-country trail. And so that's kind of where we come to compromise with facilities and the cross-country. The NAIA is like, okay, fine, you can take a 10-foot swath away from the trail, but please don't mow anything else, kind of thing. And the cross-country trails has also been a blessing in the way of like accessibility. We're able to use these trails with our gators and to take things back there, take things back in these areas. So, and then obviously sometimes brings like unwanted walkers and people who don't really have respect for these areas. And so, yeah, it's a blessing and a curse to say the least. But yeah, we are figuring out basically how to work with facilities and the cross-country team to make these areas obviously accessible for them, and then also paying mind to the ecosystem at large, of course.
I was just, mentioning our neighbors in Missouri have a lot more money for producing educational materials about invasive species, and so there's actually a fairly new resource, moinvasives.org. It's the Missouri Invasive Plant Council. It's a really great place to look for. They have quite similar invasive species issues as we do, and it's a great place to look for information on what you should be watching for, how to identify them. So it's moinvasives.org. moinvasives.org, moinvasives.org. Pretty great website. Kansas, I've been part of multiple efforts with big state agencies in the states to try to get an invasives plant council together, but there's no funding, so it's really difficult to get it going. But Missouri's doing it well.
Thank you, Courtney.